This is Frankie G. Morales, your rock and roll science teacher, with an online tutoring on limiting reactants. The goal of today's tutoring session is to find the limiting reactant in a chemical reaction. Now you're going to find that this is just like in everyday life, when sometimes a chemist doesn't have enough of something to do what he or she would like, then that's going to limit how much product they can make. For example, if you had brand new jar of peanut butter and a brand new jar of jelly, and you know you could make a bunch of sandwiches, but then you realize that you only have 3 slices of bread, well, I guess that's going to limit you to what? How many sandwiches? 1.5 sandwiches, I guess, is what that's going to limit you to. So the same thing applies in chemistry. Sometimes you don't have enough of some reactant, and that's going to limit the amount of product that you make. Please notice that for this reaction you've got 2 moles of hydrogen gas, and you can react it with 2 moles of oxygen gas, and the question is, how many moles of water can you produce with what you've got? Now you'll notice that you also need a balanced equation so that you can actually do this correctly. Now we're assuming that you have 2 moles available of hydrogen gas and 2 moles available of oxygen gas. For this kind of problem, we're going to have to find out the mole ratio. How many moles of hydrogen is equivalent to moles of water? You'll notice here on your balanced equation that you have 2 moles of hydrogen will produce 2 moles of water, along with an implied 1 mole of oxygen. So for my first factor, I've got a 2 to 2 ratio, hydrogen to water, and I've got a 1 to 2 ratio, oxygen to water. Remember, we always start with what we're given over here on the upper left-hand side of our dimensional analysis tool. Then what we want goes over here on the upper right-hand side of our dimensional analysis. We're given 2 moles of hydrogen gas, so you'll notice that when we use our conversion factor, that moles of hydrogen, actually 2 moles, that whole thing is going to cancel because we have 2 moles of hydrogen on top and 2 moles of hydrogen on bottom. So we immediately see that our answer, without having to use the calculator, is 2 moles of water. For our next case, we're going to see how many waters we can make with 2 moles of oxygen. We've got our 2 moles here from what we were given. Please notice that these have been color-coded so you can follow where the givens end up. We've got this yellow, it ended up here. We've got this green, it ended up here and here. And the implied 1 in front of the oxygen is right there. So for the second one, we're going to see how much water we can make with 2 moles of oxygen. You'll notice that for the second example, the mole of oxygen cancels, but not the 2. The 2 stays there because it cannot cancel with that 1. And then, so what we've got here is we're going to multiply 2 times 2 across the top, divide by 1, so don't bother to punch that in your calculator. The answer is simply 4. And then you'll notice also that your units that you're left with is moles of water. Please note that when you compare the 2 cases, you see that hydrogen gas only gives you, here's the hydrogen, it only gives you 2 moles of water, and the oxygen gas, the 2 moles of oxygen, actually gives you 4 moles of water. Of course, then the limiting reagent is going to be the one that produces less water, and then you would circle that in a practice problem in class, and that way I will know that you have identified the limiting reactant as hydrogen. I would, if I was just using one equation, I would expect you to circle it there as well, or you could just write that hydrogen is the limiting reagent just like that. So, watch this as many times as you need to get comfortable with limiting reactants. And for now, this is Frankie G. Morales, your rock and roll science teacher, signing off.